Gordon Taylor, the PFA chief executive, has announced a 6-point action plan to deal with racism in football after criticism from some of the union's members. Now, Taylor's action plan calls for, number one, speeding up the process of dealing with reported racist abuse with close monitoring of any incidents. 2, consideration of stiffer penalties for racist abuse, and to include an equality awareness program for culprits and clubs involved. 3, an English form of the Rooney Rule introduced by the NFL in America in 2003 to make sure qualified black coaches are on interview lists for job vacancies. Number 4, the proportion of black coaches and managers to be monitored and any inequality or progress highlighted. Number 5, racial abuse to be considered gross misconduct in player and coach contracts and therefore potentially a sackable offence. And number 6, not to lose sight of other equality issues such as gender, sexual orientation, disability, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and Asians in football. I look at it like this. I can fully understand players being sick of unions not doing anything. That is fair. Rio Ferdinand, however, I personally don't get. I'm not really a fan of his on a general basis. I mean, Gman, we've discussed before about the whole "Am I bothered" Roy thing, and I thought he was really immature. Yeah. Not his biggest fan. He needs to stop tweeting and texting and doing whatever else he's doing and focus on his defending after the last few games.
Yeah, well, as it was just said there in one of those stories, you can't run the world by tweeting and texting.
Exactly. You need to be talking with the people trying to eliminate racism from the game, e.g. the PFA, e.g. kick it out. So also for me it's a case of a breakaway black players union. Horrible idea. Hope it doesn't happen. I don't think it will happen. I think it's just the papers coming out with more stuff to try and sell stories. They get one rumor, they latch onto it, and that's what the parasitic media does. They really go to town with it. But at the end of the day, a black players union would be so utterly divisive, because then you'll want Asian people having their own breakaway union, and then within Asian people, you will have, say, an Indian one. You will then have you'll then have a Pakistani one. Then you'll have so many other little pockets. Then you'll end up having an Afro-Caribbean one. Then you'll end up having an African one, and it will just create. Basically football and anti-racist organizations will end up a dime a dozen if one breakaway happens. They'll end up a dime a dozen, and they'll end up more fragmented than the Christian faith. Yeah, and
you're
look
basically
at all the sects
ending
and
up
denominations
doing exactly the same thing you're trying to fight.
No, exactly. I mean, one of the points was it will encourage the extremists. I think it was Jason Brown who said that. And yeah, it would encourage the extremists, because at the end of the day, a nation, you got to think of it, a nation or even a community is at their weakest when they're divided. Yeah. United we stand, divided we fall, would be the old phrase I would throw out there. Now, moving on to Gordon Taylor fearing implosion. Again, Gordon Taylor's another one I'm not a great fan of, because he is very selective with the way he comments on the whole racism issue anyway, because with the John Terry one, and I've said this on past shows, he was very, very quiet with that one in terms of handshakes and all that. But when it was the Suarez one, he was like, no, we must hold this sacred tradition. We must keep it. There's no chance of it getting canned or scrapped. But he didn't say word one about the John Terry one. That's why I can't take Gordon Taylor 100% seriously for that reason. Because you can't just be waxing lyrical on one race case and not another. You're supposed to be representing everyone as the PFA chief executive. You're supposed to be representing everyone. Now, David Bernstein saying the sanctions for racial abuse will be reviewed. If the FA didn't feel that they weren't harsh enough, they wouldn't need to review them. Because at the end of the day, if you didn't think something was wrong, you wouldn't try and change it. So the FA have obviously seen, and of course, even Bernstein said that they've been critiqued about how they dealt with the John Terry thing, so they're looking into potentially changing the sanctions. I said, another old saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. With the FA, they clearly see that their sanctions are broke.
I personally wouldn't say broke. You know, that they've seen the outcry, they've heard the outcry of what people believe in. You know, they're trying to live up to those expectations, wants and needs. So,
yeah, but if they believe,
they're just trying to step up to the mark.
But if they believed 100% in what they did and what they did was right, there wouldn't be the need to change.
But do you really believe it's one of those scenarios where it's a belief thing? Isn't it more of a taking more of a positive action? Like,
mate, they're only doing it because they were criticised. If they weren't criticised, they wouldn't be thinking of changing, would they? That's the point I'm trying to illustrate.
That's the logic.
That's the point I'm trying to illustrate. But the action plan, the Rooney Rule. All right, let's go through the action plan, because number one, speeding up the process of dealing with reported racist abuse. I can understand that. I've got no problem with that.
I don't agree with it.
Because the John Terry one, the John Terry scenario, with the Suarez one, they were ultra quick to hand out their punishments and didn't care what anyone said. With the John Terry one, it took a year. Even though there was the legal proceedings, mate. That, as you and Gerald have said, that is a separate thing, and it should have been dealt with as such. Yeah. But the FA waited for the criminal thing, and then they ended up taking a year to make their decision, because at the end of the day, the legal charge was completely different, because that's a public order offence. Remember that. Remember, it was a fan who complained. That's how it got to that stage in the first place. So that's a separate thing. And the FA, what they were dealing with was just a football thing. So they could have done it straight away, but they didn't. For me, they late $1 short. I personally, I don't agree with that statement. That statement to me is a bit weird. It's a bit odd, because saying to speed up the process of dealing with like reported racist cases, like it's just saying to me, okay, anything racial, we're going to try and nip it in the bud straight away. Fair enough. But at the end of the day, like, what are they talking about? How fast are they talking about? What, next day, tomorrow? I don't get what they mean by speed it up. Like, you can't take a year. I think that's what I'm saying.
To be honest, the case is the case. You can't put like the John Terry thing was a fragile situation with what was happening with the other case. I know you just said, it's two separate, but at the end of the day, it was fragile. And to say that you're going to speed it up based on the John Terry case, well, will we get another case like the John Terry case?
I wouldn't be surprised if we did, to be honest.
That's what to me, that's just a statement rather than fact. It's like no case is the same, as I've always. What is my belief? So
no, true, but you have to have rules in place, and there are some rules that the FA haven't got in place. They haven't got fixed penalties for racism or for racial abuse. They haven't got fixed penalties, and as soon as you haven't got fixed penalties for something, you're making it up on the spot. And as soon as you're making it up on the spot, there's going to be incongruities. It just leads to
but in the terms of the case, especially like the Rio Ferdinand one, you know, that case had to be investigated. Maybe the investigation took too long, but it had to be investigated.
Way too.
You know, it had to be investigated because there was, and especially with the Luis Suarez one, like look how quick they did that. Did they do it right? Did they do it properly? It's like what they should be doing is saying that they're going to be investigating the case fully, you know, and standing by their mark there in my eyes, rather than saying they're putting a time limit on it, because it's not good to us.
But you know, some of the other ones, consideration of stiffer penalties for racist abuse, I can agree with that one. The proportion of black coaches and managers to be monitored, I can understand that too. But racial abuse to be considered gross misconduct in player and coach contracts and potentially a sackable offence, I agree with that as well. But the most important thing in this, for me, is point number 6 from the plan. The Rooney Rule, I'm going to come back to, and I'm going to come back to for one reason. But, you know, Gman, I think the most important one on this list is number 6. Not to lose sight of other equality issues such as gender, sexual orientation, disability, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and Asians in football.
Yeah.
Because think of it, the formation of a individual black players union, and something like the Rooney Rule, which is why I was leaving that till last. Something like the Rooney Rule, mate. There's a huge disparity, and I actually was speaking to Arsenal ladies superstar Rachel Yankee earlier briefly about it, and I was saying that basically if there's, and I also spoke to my auntie about it as well. At the end of the day, if there's with black players, there's a lot of us in the game.
Yeah. And
I put myself in that as an amateur league player. There are a lot of black players in the game. But if the Rooney Rule was to be brought in, there's not many Asians in football, period. Whether it be players, coaches, or otherwise. There's Coach Judan Ali, Coach Manisha Taylor is working hard as well. But there's such a disparity there, even more so than with us as black men. There's even more of a disparity, and at the end of the day, you can't lose sight of the other stuff. A Rooney Rule would cater well for black players, but what about the Asians in football who want to get in? Look at Ad Hoc Films. Just give a shout out to them as well. At Ad Hoc Films on Twitter. Look at Ad Hoc Films. Look at their new film, Sleeping Giant, an Indian football story. There's a lot of talent in Asia, more specifically India, with that film, but it's just not coming to the fore. It's not happening. It's just untapped talent. Now with a Rooney Rule, you're only focusing really on one race of people. You're only focusing on black people.
But is it, or is it focusing on ethnic minorities?
From what I know, it's only really an English form of the Rooney Rule. This is point number 3. Mm-hmm. An English form of the Rooney Rule introduced by the NFL in America in 2003 to make sure qualified black coaches are on interview lists for job vacancies. I'm not a fan of bringing that rule in. I said that. Remember when we did the interview? We did our interview on YouTube with director of Football Unites Racism Divides, aka third director Howard Holmes, and he mentioned the Rooney Rule. Yeah. And I personally, I'm not in favour of it. Well, and I'm still not. To be honest, that was 2 years ago. To be honest, I was speaking to
who was I speaking to? I think it was. Well, I was speaking to my dad about it. I've spoken to a couple of people. I've spoken to my dad about it over the weekend, and basically, I honestly do believe the Rooney Rule is what's needed in football. From my perspective, it's a negative positive of fighting racism. Like, you got to look at it this way, yeah. The FA would not implement or think about implementing the Rooney Rule if they did not feel there was something wrong within the game. You wouldn't think it, because you just wouldn't say, oh, you know what, let's just bring a rule where we're gonna, force black people into the front line, because if there wasn't racism there, you wouldn't be thinking that sort of logic. But obviously,
so similar to the FA thing, if they didn't think their sanctions were wrong, they wouldn't think of changing them.
Yeah.
Alright.
But in the case of in the case of the sanctions, yeah, if you want to take it in that way, in the case of the let me just get back onto this point. What I'm trying to say with the Rooney Rule now, at the end of the day, it's not enforcing managers, owners to be signed. Mm-hmm. I honestly just think it's a negative positive. You at the end of the day, it's forcing a black person to be seen, and at the end of the day get his opportunity to have that interview. Regardless if he's rubbish, you don't sign him, you don't take him on as a manager or coach or whatever. But at the end of the day, it's giving him that opportunity to get himself out there. If he's not getting that opportunity in the first place, how is that fair?
It's not fair, but at the same time,
there's a form of snubbery that's already out there,
well,
how is that fair?
Well, I think at the same time,
how is it going to change if you don't enforce the change?
But I think if you're going to enforce the change, you can't just do it for one race in particular. I don't think you can, because at the end of the day, that's unfair to every other race, which is in a kind of backhanded way a form of racism in itself, because you're segregating other races to promote one race, which I personally don't agree with. That's why I don't agree with the Rooney Rule.
All right.
And also, just because we've got a couple messages from Manisha Taylor, our next Pitch Talk Meets interviewee, who has said don't agree with the breakaway union, breaks away from the unity, which is true. But she's also said let's stick to BME as a label, not Asian or black specifically. So black, minority, ethnic as a label, not Asian or black specifically, which I agree with.
BME's got black in it, so at the end of the day,
but that's black, minority, ethnic. It's got black in the title, obviously, but at the same time, it's got minority, ethnic. So other races come into the minority, ethnic part. I'm not keen on the Rooney Rule. I'm not keen on it, because as said,
I'm keen on enforcing doors to be open, to be honest.
But you've got to do it. You've got to do it for everyone, not just one race. That's why the Rooney Rule I'm not keen on, because it only really opens the door for one race.